Hello and welcome to part 8 of this short story series, A Day in the Life of Julian of Norwich, narrated by myself, IsisiAllthings. If you want to follow along, please subscribe and hit the bell button that you may be informed of the next story. Thank you. How Margery paved her way to pilgrimage. In part 7, we began to see how Julian of Norwich and Margery Kempe were truly bringing back the power of the feminine mystic for healing and nurturing the wound of the patriarchy, although they may have been unaware of the momentous work that they were doing at the time. They made valiant efforts to return the balance of the sacred feminine and divine masculine by their hard-won choices. Decisions that were based upon their direct connection to their God, or what we may call source today. This morning, it's a new day with more sacred sightings to discuss. So we begin the story at the break of dawn, and we will find out what happens today. Margery coughs and I wake with a start. I may have never had a visitor in this little cell in the last 40 years, and am unaccustomed to the noises of another human being in the night, especially not the light snoring. I glance over to the mattress on the floor, where she's tucked in a mound of blankets, and realise that she's still slumbering. As my eyes close again, a smile creeps across my face. It is delightful to meet and commune with a sister of the soul, as she had called me. What a wonderful thing to be in the company of one with like mind, heart, and spirit. A dear soul who has experienced the religious ecstasy of the Lord, as we both had. We did not think of ourselves as mystics at the time, but this is now the understanding of these shewings today. We simply felt absorbed or as one with the Christ and other angels or saints in these moments of pure bliss, when all notion of self fell away and a chasm of empty space seemed to open up all around us. We both had a daily practice of devotional prayer and meditation, and from this close communion came a drawing close of the veil of the seen and the unseen worlds. Also, some of the things that we saw, felt, or heard were different from each other. There were also many similarities in the bond that we felt with the Lord in these precious moments. I recalled some of the amazing things that Margery had told me late last night. The way that the Holy Spirit whooshed in, sounding like the rustling of the wind, or with an air pop like the bellows, and then Jesus would materialize in front of her eyes. Sometimes she would hear beautiful music that she knew had come from paradise. It was so lovely. It would touch her heart deeply, and she would be overwhelmed by emotion and sympathy for others as it opened her heart to devotion. And this was always the reason that she would then begin to sob uncontrollably and wail out loudly. Or indeed, she would sometimes hear the call of a robin or a dove as a precursor to a messenger from God. And the more recent of these, she clearly heard the voice of the Almighty, as if he was standing right next to her. And he'd asked her to come to Norwich to visit me. I thought how marvellous a coincidence it was that my favourite bird was robin redbreast, and I felt a surge of gratitude well up in my heart. Now, whenever I see him in the future trilling his beautiful song, I will always be reminded of my dear Margery while she is away, travelling the world as a pilgrim, treading footsteps of light and devotion. She will be healing her own soul, the land she walks upon, and the minds and hearts of those humble ones through to princes and bishops in far-off holy lands. I see her intention is to regale those who will listen with the signs and portents that Christ had given her. And with these wonderful thoughts floating around in my mind, I drifted back off to sleep again. Margery jumped and groaned as she swore at the rat that had come sniffing around for crumbs. "Out, you foul thing!" she hissed as she brushed away the late-night crumbs that had attracted her furry visitor. We both laughed, stretched and reached for our rosaries in order that we might pray together while still in the warmth and comfort of our beds. As we softly chanted our Hail Marys, the sun shone in with that sharp beam of light, and the golden orbs danced around the cell in joy. Today, Margery and I expected a more sumptuous breakfast than was my usual meal. She had paid my maid, Sarah, a sum of money that she might source some lighter, softer bread and even some eggs for our breakfast. Despite her young age, Margery was troubled with her teeth and admitted that too many years of indulgence had rotted them somewhat. "Oh, Julian, I'm so looking forward to breakfast this morning. I do hope Sarah knows how to scramble the eggs just so. I love them when they're not like bouncing rubber balls, but soft and creamy." My mouth watered. I couldn't recall the last time I had partaken of such eggs due to my simple lifestyle. "It was so kind of you to provide so generously for our comforts these last days," I exclaimed. "It has been a veritable treat. I will miss you sorely when you are gone on your travels." "Ah, about that," said Margery as she picked her way out of the layers of coverlets and blankets, stretched her arms above her head, yawning. "I forgot to tell you how it was that I convinced my husband to let me go travelling and agree to the vow of chastity into the beginning." She laughed heartily, as was her wont, and that beaming smile was on full display. "I do love your mischievous spirit, Margery. Pray tell how on earth you managed to arrange such an audacious thing." "Well, as you know, over the last 20 years, I have been the devoted housewife, mother, and businesswoman. My husband, Mr. Kempe, on the other hand, has gotten himself into debt, not being as canny as I with his money. I used to be quite the lady in my younger years, jealous of the neighbours if they should sport some finery that I thought better than my own. I was raised with money, as you know, because my father, John Brunham, was mayor 5 times over. I thought nothing of adorning myself in the best fashions of the time," she said, strutting around the room, feigning superiority. I laughed, and she continued, "I suppose you would call me a materialist, and I expected to be kept in the manner to which I had become accustomed." Poor Mr. Kempe could not keep up with me. It wore rather a large hole in his pocket, feeding 14 hungry young mouths as well. And the more visions and conversations I had with the Lord, I knew that I had to reform myself and my ways to become more devoted to Jesus, not my husband. She burst out laughing. The neighbours were also keen to wag the finger and tell me that my failed businesses were a sign that I was out of favour with God. So I started to attend church regularly, 3 times a day for confession, and to atone for my sins, I would fast on a Friday. As I became more and more convinced of the joys of heaven and the love of God experientially, it overtook my need for all these creature comforts, even to the point where I decided I did not want to sleep with my husband anymore. "Oh dear," I said, "that must have been a trifle difficult," and blushed. Margery was always brutally honest, and I was unused to discussing such things, but secretly I was more curious than ever to know what happened next. We were almost finished our toilet, and the maid came back from the kitchen soon, I wanted to hear the story before she arrived with the breakfast. So, how did you persuade him that you wished to lead a chaste life as a woman of God? I inquired. As a businesswoman, Lady Julian, you learn to haggle. Everyone has their price. I had John over a barrel. I had the means to pay off his debts, and I tempted him to continue a lavish Friday of food and wine as we had used to before I started the fasting. Eventually he caved in and had agreed to sign this vow of chastity, upon which I promptly announced I would be off to Norwich to visit you for your permission and blessing, to travel to the sacred sites and the holy lands as a pilgrim. Well, you should have seen his face. He knew he had been tricked good and proper. But a vow is a vow, and stick to it we must both. Now, we both burst out laughing and could not contain ourselves until Sarah knocked at the tiny window with our breakfast. It was as wonderful as I had hoped it would be. The eggs were soft and pillowy, the bread warm and scented, and there was even a pot of golden honey. What utter luxury! We laughed as we carried it to the heavy oak table and ate to our heart's content. And suddenly the world seemed to me to be the most beautiful place it ever was. So content was I.